Think Less, See More podcast, episode 3, part 2. Today, we are speaking about the ending of thought and also about how thinking all the time and being identified with this process of thinking can prevent us from facing these feelings and emotions that come up and ultimately prevents us from being able to understand and process what we have been through. In episode 3, part 1, we spoke about the nature of thought and how thinking allows us to understand what's going on, not just based on what we're perceiving, not just based on this sensory information that is arriving at our brain, but also based on our past experiences and knowledge and ideas that we have learned, stored up, and that we associate with what we're currently perceiving. It allows us to modify our behavior based on our past experiences and knowledge and ideas that we have learned and been taught. For example, we can perceive something, sense it, and then recall, bring this memory of these past experiences into the present moment through thinking these words and ideas that allow us to recall these words, ideas, these images that allow us to bring up these past experiences into the present. Think about them and be like, last time I perceived this, I did this, and it didn't end very well. So this time I'll modify my behavior based on the recollection of these past experiences, based on this thinking, in order to this time do something else. And also, last time we sensed this thing, between last time we sensed it and this time of sensing it, someone may have told us some vital information that is associated with this thing, and therefore we can also modify our behavior based on what we've learned and been taught from others, this knowledge, these ideas. So thinking allowed us to become extremely intelligent, modifying our behavior, understanding what we're perceiving and deciding what to do, not just based on what we are perceiving, but also based on these thoughts, these images, these ideas, and recalling all of this past memory, this reaction to what we're perceiving, based on all this memory, all of our conditioning in the sense of what we've been through and what we've been taught. Through storing all of that up as memory and bringing it into the present in the form of these thoughts, we can modify our behavior based on past experiences and knowledge, and that was extremely useful. However, when we shifted to having this facet of the intellect, these thoughts, these images, this constant process of thinking just always happening, when that began to happen, that then led to confusion. It became a hindrance instead of a help. A good way to describe it is that before we could be aware of what was going on, we could just sense it, listen to it, clearly perceive what was happening with a purity of perception. And then when these thoughts came up, they could be helpful. They could help us understand, help us decide what to do based on what we had experienced and what we know. But now, because every time we perceive something, we only have a split second where we have this purity of perception before that perception is really corrupted by not just all these thoughts kind of coming up and kind of constantly occurring, but also by them really taking up our consciousness, really being like a screen that prevents us from purely seeing what's going on, because we're only perceiving things for a split second as this kind of whirlwind of thoughts is always happening. You only get little windows where we clearly see what's happening, and then all the thoughts are just there, taking up our consciousness, acting like a screen. That means what ends up happening is that our perception of what's happening is distorted by all of the past experiences and ideas, our conditioning, and the arising of that conditioning in the present moment in the form of thoughts distorts how we perceive what's going on, because we never have time where this thinking isn't happening. We're never able to see through our conditioning, what we've experienced, what we've been taught. Therefore, our perception is never pure, clear. We never have time where we don't think, where we just see what's happening with the objectiveness of our five senses. Instead, what we see is always distorted by the past experiences and ideas that come up. They form a screen. It's like if you look out the window. If that window is covered with all this dust and dirt and bugs, and that's a real metaphor for all our conditioning, if all of these memories and ideas are always coming up and always, covering, acting like a screen in front of our eyes, all splattered all over the window, when we look out the window, we won't be able to see clearly what's outside the window. Instead, we'll see a blurred image, blurred by all of these splatters, these bugs, and this dust, which is a metaphor for all of our thoughts constantly happening, providing this screen in front of our eyes, which prevents us from objectively sensing what's going on. Instead, we sense it for a split second, and then all of these thoughts and ideas that we associate with it come up, blur our screen, and lead to confusion. We don't see what's there, we see what's there distorted by what we've been through, how we've been conditioned, the propaganda that we've absorbed, the beliefs and ideas that our parents and friends and school have taught us. And it doesn't mean that these ideas can't be useful. Like I said, if we have them here operating and we have space around them, they can help us understand because we can look, sense, have the objectivity of our five senses. Obviously, to an extent, we don't sense everything, but we sense what we can. And that is something that can be pure. It can be simple, simply sensing. And then we can have it to help us. But when this is always turned on, it prevents us from having this simplicity, this objectivity, this ability to understand what's going on for ourselves by just sensing it instead of constantly understanding what's going on through our conditioning, what we've been taught, what we've been told. We're taught that these people are like this. Therefore, when we see them, what happens is we don't see them as they are. We don't objectively sense them and listen to them. Instead, as soon as we see them, our conditioning pops up and distorts how we see them. And that is what we spoke about in episode 1. But then this poses the question, if this thinking is always happening and you understand how clearly it means that you can't purely see what's going on, you understand how it leads to confusion and, acts as a screen that clouds our purity of perception, prevents there from being simplicity, prevents us from understanding things for ourselves. And the question is it possible for this thinking to end? Not completely, as in you never think again, but is it possible for there to be silence? And if so, how do we get to that silence? Can we think ourselves to silence? If we think about not thinking and try really hard, will that do it? No. Is that kind of silence of concentration enough, or does it end as soon as we stop focusing on our breath? And even when it happens, it's limited. It's just on the breath. So how do we get to this silence? This is a question I'm posing to you. And as I explain it further, it's not about you listening to me and just accepting what I'm saying. It's about us inquiring into it together. I'm not in a place of authority, but there's no use in listening to what I'm saying unless you inquire, you look, you find out for yourselves. That's what we're speaking about here. And when we look at this possibility about having these thoughts end and therefore returning to this simplicity of perception, which can be informed by the thoughts, but having moments where there can be silence, there can be stillness, we can listen and understand what's going on without our understanding being corrupted by our conditioning. But how do we do that? And I think the best place to start with that is really what I spoke about in episode 2. We can't force ourselves to stop thinking. If you think about not thinking, that is thinking, so that doesn't really get you very far. But what we can do is to, instead of trying to force ourselves to stop thinking, which, like I said, with the concentration on the breath does help at the beginning, gives you that rest, but then that also gives you the opportunity to then, like I explained in episode 2, then become openly aware of the fact that you are thinking. So really, in order to begin to see, to find out if thinking can end, we really need to understand thinking. See what it is. By being able to clearly see for yourself what I've been speaking about, see how this thinking operates, how it's these memories and ideas coming up. As you begin to become aware of that process, look at it, understand it, see how it limits you, see the futility of it, it naturally begins to fade away. And you begin to become aware of not just the thoughts, but also, remember I said there are those little gaps where we do just perceive something before these thoughts come in, even though this thinking is kind of happening all the time. There are these little moments where we do just look at something, and even for a split second, we don't think. And as you become aware of the activity of your mind, you don't just become aware of and understand the thinking, and by seeing how it operates, inquiring into it, seeing what it's doing, that just doesn't allow it to slow down and fade away as you see the futility and limited nature of it. But you also become aware of this little bit of space, this silence between thoughts that before you were not aware of. And then as that happens, there can then be the flowering of humility. As we begin to look at and understand, that helps us. But the real key part of answering this question, can thought end? Can I reconnect with this silence? Is can I be humble? Can I have humility? Can I realize and accept that I don't know? And that is the hardest bit about meditating, as all of our conditioning, our experiences, our ideas and things that we've been taught, we become very attached to them. These thoughts and ideas are all we have because we're identified with our nationalities and our religions and our beliefs and, where we're from and what we're like. We are not humble. We're not able to realize that, wait a minute, everything that I've been through and things that I've been taught, maybe that isn't giving me the full picture. Maybe despite all these things that I've experienced and all these things that I've been taught, maybe I don't know. Maybe they'll never let me fully understand what's going on. Maybe I need to let go, stop clinging to these experiences and these beliefs that I have and these preconceptions in order to see clearly. And that is where humility and this innocence comes in. On the one hand, like I said, I spoke about the nature of thought, what thinking is. We must become aware of it, watch it, understand it, see its futility when it's always happening. Obviously it's useful sometimes, like I explained, but thinking all the time is futile. We don't just see that, but we also begin to have this humility by seeing that allows us to then be humble and be like, wait a minute, this whole process of me bringing in these experiences and these ideas, it's not enough. It's not letting me understand. I don't see clearly. And that requires a lot of humility and innocence because it's difficult to let go of these beliefs and ideas that we're attached to. Like I said, because they've been with us our whole life. We've had these thoughts come up, these beliefs come up and shape us, and we've identified ourselves with them, and so have others, and we come together and form groups. And it's very difficult to have the humility to let go, to realize that you don't know, and to realize that the truth of what's going on can only be fully perceived and felt when all of this activity, all of your beliefs and your ideas and this really small, narrow set of beliefs and experiences can end. Like I said, they can come up and help us, but unless we have silence, humility, letting go, realizing that our narrow experience and our narrow ideas can never fully represent the totality of this ever-changing, amazing world. So therefore, in order to connect with this silence, you shouldn't just practice becoming aware of and, like I said, seeing and understanding how you're thinking, but also be humble. Realize that you don't know. Let go of this narrow, you know, small reservoir of experiences and ideas. Realize that they will never allow you to fully understand what's going on. And in order for you to have clarity, to have compassion, to be able to understand the world and yourself and others, you must have humility. You must realize that you don't know and realize that the limited nature of your ideas of what you've been taught and what you've experienced will never give you the full picture. And that is why you need this humility and this innocence, as well as this insight and understanding into the nature of thinking, to then begin to have silence, become aware of the thoughts, become aware of how they're limited, become aware of the space between thoughts, and begin to open up that richness, that just purity of silence. And when there is that silence, there is that space, then we can truly listen to others, truly communicate with others. You see, we have that space. And then that really nicely leads on to how we can also then begin to process what we've been through. As normally, when we think all the time, when these big feelings, something happens, and like I said, when we sense that thing, it might bring up a past experience that's associated with it. But if that's a painful experience, that's a difficult experience, then what happens is when we sense this thing, that experience comes up, we think about it, these feelings come up, and that can then make us feel bad and sad and feel that pain of that thing that we'd been through. But because, like I said, that thought comes up, those memories, that feeling comes up in order to kind of, help us understand what's going on, the things I explained about thinking. But when it comes up now, because we're in this state of always thinking, Like I said, when the feeling comes up and tries to come up, it's a past experience, it's something we've been through that we haven't processed. And in the same way, useful things that we've experienced and ideas will help us understand what's going on and come up in the form of these thoughts. So do painful things that we associate with what we're sensing, we remember it. But because we always think and we don't like these feelings, we push them away. When this feeling comes up, it does hurt us. But in the same way, like I said, when we're thinking all the time, all of our conditioning, all of these ideas, this kind of, this ocean of thought is just continually flowing. We never are able to sit with that person, truly listen to them, truly understand them without thinking about what they're saying or bringing all these past experiences that we've had into our head. And it's the same when these feelings come up. They may come up because we associate them with something we're sensing now, something might happen now that reminds us of what we've been through. But because when that thing comes up, those thoughts come up and then that feeling comes up, because we can't stop thinking, because we can't have that space, that silence, and just sit and, listen, sense, feel this feeling or emotion in the same way we might when we have that silence, listen to another, because the thinking just goes off again. Whenever these big feelings come up, we are never able to sit with them. We then go off justifying them, thinking them, pushing them away, distracting ourselves to something else. As this, like I said, this ocean of the mind of these thoughts is always flowing. But applying the same principle, when we begin to become aware of this silence generate this awareness of these thoughts as they come up. When these feelings come up, instead of just thinking about them, justifying them, moving away, going on this cycle of thinking, as we begin to generate this silence, this humility, we can then sit with feelings. We can recall past experiences, and instead of just going off on other experiences and other things and moving away from it, not wanting to face it, instead we can just sit down with it, have that silence and feel that feeling, let out that feeling. That's really what happens in therapy. They speak to you in such a way that you can bring these feelings up, really sit with them, and they are there, they support you, they help you. But the key part is you being able to speak, bring these past experiences up, speak about it. But then the crunch point is when that big emotion comes up. They're there to help you, to let you feel it, to let you cry, to let you let it out. But when we think all the time, we never give ourselves that silence, that period where we're just sensing that feeling. Like I said, if we're always thinking, if all these ideas and thoughts are always coming up, that prevents us from fully understanding what we're sensing. We look at someone, we listen to them. If we have silence, then we can truly listen to them, as we're no longer translating or distorting or moving away from what they're saying based on what we know and what we've experienced. Instead, we can listen to them, understand them. And it's the same where these feelings come up. If we can now be in a point where we're thinking less, we have space, we have this silence, then when these memories of things that have happened and these big painful feelings come up, we can then, instead of moving away from them or justifying them, we can just sit with them and listen to them in the same way we listened to the other, in order to truly understand that person, in order to truly process and feel this feeling. We must cultivate this ability to sit with it silently. We may sit and thoughts about a past thing will come up, but when that feeling comes up, that energy of pain, we must cultivate this ability to sit with it silently, to not justify it, to not move away from it, but just face it, feel it. And that's difficult and scary, but that is really the key message of this episode, is that thinking all the time doesn't just prevent us from seeing clearly and clearly understanding another, as when we try to understand them, all of our conditioning and all these memories come up and prevent us from seeing them as they are, from having this purity of perception, from sensing without thinking. And it also prevents us from understanding ourselves, as when we think about things and these big feelings come up, instead of dealing and processing and feeling and maybe crying or letting out these feelings, instead, like, the machine of thought just keeps whirring, keeps going on, and we move away from them. But if we're able to understand that, generate space, begin to move towards silence, then we can deeply understand others by sitting with them, listening to them without thinking about what they're saying. And when these big feelings come up, we can sit with them, listen to them, feel these feelings, understand them, and then be free from them. You see, meditation doesn't just allow you to understand others, to think less and clearly perceive what they're saying, but also to clearly sit with, connect and feel and let out these feelings of past pains and worries and hatred of yourself or whatever, not by thinking about it, justifying it, understanding this feeling based on all these other ideas and things and whatever, but just by having that silence, that clarity, you can then understand others and the world around you with simplicity and simply sit and face these big feelings and pains that try to come up, but that you always run away from. And that is why thinking less and the ending of thought doesn't just allow you to clearly understand others and the world around you, but also allows you to clearly understand yourself, process what you've been through, be aware of these thoughts of past experiences as they come up, and then when the crunch time comes, just sit with those feelings without having to move away, just with silence. And it's very intense and difficult, but the better you get at it, the more times you're able to have that silence. Maybe when you're listening to another, or looking at a lovely view, or sitting there in your room when this difficult feeling comes up, the more time we can just sit silently, purely perceive and have the space to hold, listen to others, the world around us, and our own feelings, the more we can understand them, the more wisdom, insight, and freedom we can have. And that is why you should think less and see more. I will see you in episode 3, part 2, where we will discuss the link between thinking less, processing what we've been through, and having silence, and how that links to compassion, morals, and living in a more ethical and kind manner. And yeah, thank you for listening. See you guys in episode 3, part 3.